everybody. Welcome to another webinar here at Route Consultant. And as I always say, if you're here for the first time, we've never met. My name is Josh Gregory. I am the Vice President of Education here at Route Consultant. All that means is that I'm here to help educate all of you on this space if you're trying to get into it for the first time. But many of you I know who are watching live or are watching on YouTube later have been contractors for years and are trying to find out more ways to improve your business, to improve your profitability, continue to be successful in this space. And we're here for both of those. If you're not familiar with Route Consultant, our team ran hundreds of routes across the country in both P&D and line haul. And today we're really here to help with all of those things that I was just mentioning. Now, before I go too much farther, I do have a quick disclaimer to read, as I do every week. So Route Consultant is not endorsed by and is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Now, for everyone who's here every week, you know the format, you know how this is going to go. But for today, we're going to go over some content. We're going to go over some things, new listings and updates. And then at the end, we will have Q&A. So as always, whether those questions are about what we talk about today or anything that you have questions on in the space or what's going on in the industry as a whole, we're here to answer them. My only request is there's a Q&A button at the bottom. If you're trying to submit those questions to us, that's the best place to put them. And we'll get to them, I promise. It's just that's the best place. You can type them in at any time, whether it's when I open it up at the end or early on, and we will make sure to address those questions by the end of the webinar today. And we try to answer all the questions. Sometimes we run out of time, but if we do run out of time, save your question for next week. Now, for this week, my co-hosts today, who I'll bring on in just a second, are Amy and Dave Byers, who, for those of you who've been in the industry, who've been on Facebook, been around for a while, you've probably seen their names, seen their faces. They're contractors, both P&D and line haul, operating in a variety of terminals across the country with a ton of experience in this space that we've brought on to help talk through a lot of the crazy things that are happening in this industry to kind of give that on the ground view of what's going on. So Amy and Dave, I see you there. Why don't you go ahead and say hi, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Hi guys, Amy Byers with Slicker Trucking.
Hi, I'm Dave Byers, Slicker Trucking as well.
Perfect, and it's always great to see you guys. How's the weather there? It looks great.
It is 70 and sunny. It's a nice day today. Yeah.
It looks beautiful.
We're enjoying it before it gets too crazy. It's supposed to be in the 60s tonight. So
Oh, wow. What a treat, right?
Right.
Perfect. So today we're going to be talking around a couple of things. Before we get to kind of the meat of the topic for today, there's a couple of things that we saw come out in the P&D space around the metals program over this last week. Could you just quickly touch on that for those who may have seen it, may not have, just to kind of give people an update on what that is?
Yeah, so FedEx just announced a small route kind of exemption in the metals. Before in May of 2024, they announced that APVs, managers, bulk routes, and just in general help, anybody that would log into the scanner would be considered a resource. And then that would be calculated into your productivity, which then hits your metals, contributes to a higher percentage of your lytic or your metal score. So that was a big conversation that we had at Expo about running managers and things like that. And we did talk about how FedEx is kind of meeting us and open to having better conversations later, and has been leaning into listening to contractors and things like that. And I think, Josh, you and I had a conversation earlier this week, and it was exciting. I did post on the Facebook page also that it was exciting to see that FedEx did meet us kind of halfway, I would say. I know it's not a fix-all for everybody, but any route that is running under 90 minutes will be considered 0.2 routes. So instead of, say, you have 10 people you would then have 9.2 if one of those routes was under 90 minutes. So that's going to help us a huge amount, because we do run our managers on like a sweep. Sometimes they do a pickup. I know it's not perfect. I did hear from some people that have some rural that do run bulk out to rural, that it's, almost a 90-minute commute, right? So there's going to be a little bit of shifting, and I totally agree with everyone that it doesn't fit every single small route capacity to be exempted, but I think it is a start. And I think it's something that definitely proves that FedEx is listening to us, and, that there is room to have these conversations, and that they are willing to listen when the model is a little bit broken. So for me, I ran this on our small route, and I think I posted, we were like in the high 80s as far as efficiency. So that it would have been like a -13. And after running the new model, it put us in the high 90s. So, which would then only be just a few percentage, under 5% negative efficiency. So I think it was a really big testament to, what can be done when you have good, positive conversations with FedEx. But the APVs, everything that's still running like a half day, and I do have those routes, right? I have the bulk routes that run 4 hours over the 90 minutes, but this is definitely going to help if your managers need to help sweep, a pickup or do something like that. So I think it's going to be a huge help, to those that are running those help routes.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things where, yes, in a perfect world, every time FedEx rolled something out that's a new change, it would be exactly what we want and fix
Right.
every problem, and we would all, live in the fantasy world together. But
Kumbaya.
yeah, I think it's always worth calling out. It is a good thing when FedEx listens and makes a change. I
Yes.
think it is still completely valid to say there is more to be done. There are more
Yes.
conversations to be had, and there are more changes to be made. But it behooves us as a contractor community to be excited when positive changes do happen, instead of saying, that was not nearly enough to fix anything. We want to be happy about the small incremental changes when they happen, so that we can continue to push FedEx to make those changes. Because if we get upset every time that it's not perfect, it really disincentivizes FedEx to see any benefit to making these changes for benefit.
This is definitely a win. Not the full fix, but it is definitely a win. It doesn't fix all of the partial routes that we run, or the truly part-time gentlemen that we run. It's missing a lot of variables in their calculation. I'll agree with that, but this is definitely a win, and I'm very fortunate to be able to look at my business that way and see this as a win, and make those calculations, do my own math, as I always say. But I think it's really good. I think it's, in the end, it's going to be fantastic for people.
Yeah. And I think another recent change that we're actually going to talk about on a webinar next week is FedEx rolled out the line haul contracts, and there were some very large complaints with some of the things that they added to the line haul contracts, and they walked back some of that as well. So I think that's another good example of FedEx making the changes that we want them to. Oh, it looks like there they are. They're back. But yes, I think that was another example. Like I said, anybody who's in the line haul space, that's another thing we'll talk about next week in terms of another positive change FedEx made after listening to contractor feedback.
Yes.
So for the meat of today, so if you have other questions on that metal side of things, like I said, if you're a current contractor in our Facebook group, Amy made a great post on it, but we can talk you through any questions you may have about that, either in the Q&A or offline. But for today, so one of the things we've talked about a lot in the past is something around scale, which, for those of you who are familiar with it, they're basically limits that FedEx sets on the size of your organization, both maximum size limits and minimum at the terminal level. And it's definitely a really important consideration for understanding your business's growth trajectory, and for understanding what FedEx will and won't allow. But a lot of what we've talked about in the past on here was kind of me talking about things at a general high level. So we wanted to spend some time today with Dave and Amy, getting a little more in the weeds and talking through what it really means to deal with these scale limits. So like I said before, we're talking about both minimum and maximum. So one thing I wanted to talk about quickly before we get into it, I think a lot of people think of you all as, the really large contractors that, that's great. You kind of see things at a high level. You kind of see things from across the country. but they think that you may not necessarily run into some of the small scale problems. So is that true, or do you still deal with the other end of the spectrum, those kind of minimum scale challenges as well?
So I think, and we did touch on this at Expo, but one of the things that you'll hear us say quite a bit is, being a large contractor and being line haul and P&D and, being able to put layers in, of management and be able to manage the business from a deeper level, definitely has given us, an edge in running our business, our corporation, Slicker Trucking. However, each of our individual contracts, so we have 4 P&D contracts. We have 2 that are 32 to 34 routes a day, and we have 2 that are between 10 and 12 routes every day. Each one of those is in a different geographical area, different demographic of driver, and we have those different problems from the 10 route contract to the 32 route contract. And in the 10 route contract, when we have a call off or when there is a truck breakdown, we feel that same pain that a 10 route contractor is having. Now, from a corporate level, I think we have some best practices, is why we're so excited to share some of the things that we are able to share with you guys. But I think outside of that, we're in it, right? We're in it with the 32 route contractor the same way he's in his own contract. And we're in it with the 10 route contract, maybe the same way she's in it with her 10 route contract. So it's great to be in it. And I think that's why we can leverage our best practices and give our, it's not necessarily advice, but it is, a take on how we handle certain situations and how we interpret the contract and how we kind of maneuver through those different contract levels. So, yes, while we do have a lot of best practices, I think, we are in it with everybody. We're not immune to any of the things, from the FedEx side to the negotiation side, to the scale side, to trucks and anything like that. So we are, we're definitely in it alongside of everyone else.
Yeah. And, this is, I think it's easy to forget that, that like we still have the same problems. You still have a business where you've got 10 drivers and one calls out and you feel it.
Absolutely. Her manager's in a truck.
But I think it's also, you said it's not necessarily advice, but I think the biggest thing we can do, the biggest thing route consultants always try to do, and the what we want to hear from you and that you guys are always bringing, is that one of the things you do get with scale, with operating at a bunch of places and having a lot of years of experience, is you've tried a lot of things, and you've tried a lot of things that have worked, and those are great, and you've tried a lot of things that haven't. And while those may be things that work for other people, sharing those experiences on, hey, this worked for us, here's why it did, and here's why maybe it won't work for you, and vice versa. This was horrible for us, but these are the reasons it failed. If you can think about your business in a different way, maybe these will work for you. And, this is one of those things where it is a time and money, significant amount of time and money saver to be able to hear these things and think through it. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today as well, is kind of really thinking through these, kind of ground level, like how do you deal with some of these challenges, and what does it mean for your business?
And to be fair, we're not done learning. Right.
Yeah.
We are
Right.
part of this FedEx community, and we're part of the route consultant community because we want to make sure that we are vetting everything that we do to better our business, to better that small contract, to better the big contract, to better line haul, to better the way we treat people, and the things that are interpreted by FedEx and the things that we learn and implement in our business. So we're not done learning. And by far, we always have an itchy kind of weird feel about the word expert. But we do have experience, and we do want to share what we've done, again, what's worked, what's not worked. But we are learning right alongside of everyone else. But we definitely are excited to share the things that have worked. So maybe they don't have to go through the same pains we did.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get into scale a little bit. So I think one of the interesting things to kind of give people a lens on this, because we always think about, this is what scale is right now, this is what you have to worry about right now. But I think it helps to kind of internalize what scale really means to FedEx, to kind of see how it's been over time. So, I mean, Dave, you've been in it for 20 years, and Amy, you've been in it for a while as well now at this point. So how have you seen FedEx deal and think about scale differently over the years?
One truck, one guy.
Well, we've seen the scale change crazy over years. It used to just be one man, one van, and that's how it was, and that's how they wanted it. And if you bought a second route, and were the van driver and owned a second route, that wasn't really looked upon too well. Like they wanted you to be able to run your business, and multi-van wasn't a thing. And then multi-van kind of became the way that it was. And then we found out the more routes that we had, it could free me up to start to manage the business instead of just being the driver on the route. I could run the business day to day. I could do truck maintenance, and I could be available to talk to FedEx and start to have some conversations about areas that needed some help that maybe weren't mine, or maybe what I needed in my areas. Just really transition from the one guy and one truck into what we've turned into, a pretty, what we think is a strengthy corporation over the years. And now it's given us the chance to grow into other terminals and other aspects of FedEx, which, we've transitioned into line haul, and it's really opened some doors of opportunity with this growth.
And then they went into, like, you had to have a certain number of stops. So then it was like 500 stops, right? We've been through it, right? It had to be more than 2 routes. Then they had to be at least 500 stops. Then they had to be contiguous, right? They all had to touch. So we were trading, and then there was overlap with home delivery and ground. So we've kind of been through all the different iterations, and then they've landed on this scale, right? Like a percentage. And we understand it as, in 2018, 19, when contractors started dipping out and falling off, and contingency was like the word, right? They were afraid of contractors getting too big, because you could kind of take, a third of the terminal with you. If you decided to fail, it was a big chunk. So that's a huge risk. So the scale is there, any business, not just FedEx. So they're not just, it's not just this big FedEx company that's trying to slap us on the wrist and make more problems for us. The scale has a purpose, but there are exemptions to the scale. We are exempt on both our line haul side, which has changed, which I know you're going to talk about coming up, but also on our P&D side. We have 4 different contracts. I did write it down. The range is like 7 to 21 to 27%, depending on what terminal we're in, and we're over scale in one, but we're solid, and we have constant conversations with our terminal manager. So we'll get to that a little bit, but I think, scale isn't something that you should be afraid of, but you do need to have the conversations with FedEx about it so that they understand where you are, what your growth plan is, or what your downsize plan is, depending on where you are in your career with FedEx. But I think it all comes down to, and you hear me say this almost every single time, being more transparent and communicating with your customer is definitely going to put you in a better light. We don't need to hold things so close to the vest and then surprise them, right? I think just transparency is going to help those conversations, whether you're under, exact or over.
And if you don't know where you fall in the scale, it's not on my ground biz or anything. That information comes from your terminal management. So you can ask the terminal management, hey, what percentage of scale am I in this terminal? And what is scale at the terminal, both minimum and maximum? So you can kind of find where you fall in there, so you can see where you have room, for growth or expansion or downsizing.
Yeah.
Even.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's always one of the really hard things for new buyers coming in, to find out what scale is, because there's just not like a really clean way to find it out. And I find a lot of times we'll say, have the seller go ask the terminal manager, and they'll ask, and the terminal manager say, I don't actually know.
Yes.
So it's like not even all the terminal managers know what the scale limits are at that terminal. And I will say it's probably a good sign in terms of worrying about your scale limit. If the terminal manager isn't really thinking about it, it's probably a big concern for you either.
So BDS, which is now the new SPS, will have that information for you. It used to be readily available to them, where they could literally go on a dashboard and see it. We're finding that they have to do a little bit of work to get that information. But you also have to understand that it floats, right? As volume kicks in, your percentage is going to float a little bit. Hopefully it's not going to float drastically, because it'll be proportionate growth with some of the other contracts. But if you're in a super dense area, your percentage is going to grow much faster than somebody that's in a rural area. And when we talk a little bit more about, kind of being over or under in those conversations, I'm going to give a couple of things of, what to say and what to look for so that you can help position yourself a little bit more safely.
Yeah. And I'll just say as a general note, when we're thinking about the historical perspective, we talked about how there was the risk where essentially FedEx was worried about a lot of the risk of contractors getting too big. Now we've seen the pendulum swing back, and for the most part, we're seeing FedEx being more interested in larger contractors again. And I think a lot of what they've seen is that the things that we've talked about here and that we talk about often is when you get to a little bit larger size, you've got a little bit more room to handle, call offs or to flex resources around and to have a little more margin to play with and run the business more effectively as a business instead of kind of you're knee deep in the mud on the operations level at some of these lower sizes. So we are seeing, I think a lot of the mindset around FedEx right now is that they're a little bit more comfortable as contractors get larger, which is why the minimum scale is more of a conversation than it has been previously, but we'll get to that in just a second.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I don't think they're pushing maybe for the bigger contractors, but I think they're pushing for solid, right? They're pushing for consistent, and they're pushing to hit all their metrics. So that's going to be a common thread of our discussion today is whatever size you are, it really comes down to servicing the customer, and their ability to look the other way on under, over, or whatever really comes down to your performance.
Yeah, perfect. So let's talk about the one end of the spectrum. So if you are close or above the maximum scale of a terminal, how do you operate differently? What are the conversations you focus more on, or the way you operate differently at that size?
Well, at the bigger size terminals that we have to really focus on the metrics that are bigger and deeper than your typical service, missed pickup windows, late pickup windows. We're digging way deeper into the weeds. We're working on, and safety is always a priority, but we're really focused on safety and our safety plan, and we're working on, just anything. We're way in the weeds with coding and
PPODs,
proximities. Yeah. Anything we can really focus on. Code 85s. I know they're big deals. They're starting to become bigger and bigger and bigger, but we always try to stay ahead of it so that when it does transition into a main metric, that we've already kind of smoothed it out. So it's not an issue with our bigger operations, so that they're smooth day to day.
The bigger you are, you want to get the magnifying glass off you, right? So you have to grow scalably, which means that if you had 10 routes and you're 99.8 and everything's rolling smooth, that if you double and then you're 20 routes, you should be able to maintain that. So you should be able to put controls in place, whether that's an extra BC or you're checking in, but then that growth needs to be scalable where you're managing that 99.7 or whatever your previous service levels and safety levels were. You need to maintain that at 20 and then at 30 the same. So if you go over scale, it's never a conversation about, oh my gosh, you're too big. Now you can't manage to our contractual obligations. You're too big. We need to pull it back. So I think that's just the big, and like Dave said, it just takes a little bit deeper. It's not just that surface level of service that you see on the KIs. It's really the stuff under to prove to FedEx that you are there to be the big guy. And you're there and that you can handle it, right? Your BCs are trained in a way that you're monitoring what they're monitoring. And it does take a little bit more work, though you're hands off. It's going to take either more money as in terms of, management. So, a smaller piece of a bigger pie, right? As far as net take. So you might have to hire another BC so that you can be a little bit more distance and manage things a little bit deeper. But I think that's the big take is if you're going to be a big contractor, then you need to manage like a bigger corporation and you need to just focus on the really finite details of the contract so that you're never in a position for them to say you're too big and because of this, and this, right?
When you get that large, do you find terminal management speaks with you or works with you differently, or how hard is it to get that magnifying glass off you if you are that large? Do you do anything differently there, or is it more of just you might have to invest more resources to maintain it?
So I think when you're a good contractor, regardless of size, you get that kind of seat at the table with the terminal, and you'll hear us say the seat at the table with FedEx. But I think if you're a good contractor and you're somebody that they can rely on, which I know is tough now because you don't get to keep as deep of a bench of extra drivers that we used to due to the efficiency model and some of the new pay models. You don't get to just keep, 2 or 3 extras on staff, right? You're trying to run as lean as possible and maximize your profitability. So it is kind of a catch-22 on how to manage that. But leaning on your managers, but being larger and being good, and hitting all your metrics definitely does allow you to have that seat at the table and to have better conversations, with the managers regarding safety topics and being a true resource to them, not just another guy in the terminal that's running stops. So I think that's, kind of that, but it does change when you have a bigger presence. As long as you're, again, maintaining that service and you're not a problem, you're going to get that kind of inside seat, and not in a, an unfair way, but in a deserving way. You put all your effort into it and you maintain 20 or 30% of the contract, of the terminal. You should be able to have an honest, transparent conversation about making the customer's experience better.
Yeah. Do you find have you found, are there ways to still continue to grow even if you're that big, or do you look outside of that terminal?
So in certain terminals, I think there's a capacity, right? I think, but it does position you to send work to other close terminals, which we've done. So if you're a big contractor, they know you have extra drivers because it's a big contract. I for sure have more on the bench in my 32 route contracts than I do in my 10 route contracts. But even in my 10 route contracts, if, I have an extra and no call offs, I'm able to shoot somebody off to help with another terminal or another contract, which definitely opens doors. You'll hear me say, and Dave say a lot, he kind of preaches the yes man, being that yes man to your customer. So I think that, that's definitely, where the growth comes. I think there is a cap that you're going to hit. We're at, what are we at? 32% in a terminal that's super rural. And I don't know if we could grow. I know we have the opportunity to grow in that terminal, but I don't think we would have the capacity to grow scalably and maintain what we need to maintain just because of the territory, which I will tell you is another metric that I run separately. So FedEx runs scale on stops and versus stops in the terminal. We run, I do a separate analysis that I bring up at negotiations about percentage of geography. So we talk about like how many zip codes we have versus the whole entire terminal. And we are probably closer to 55% of the geography in one of our terminals, which is a definite interesting conversation to have with FedEx when you're like, dude, I'm covering all of this area, even though I'm only this big, right? Maybe I'm only 7% of a terminal, but I'm covering 25% of the geography. Like that has to account for something, as far as coverage and resources and, financial ability to get out to that, rural stop, which comes back to, this efficiency where some of these contractors are telling us like, hey man, yeah, but I'm doing 2 stops, but it's a 90-minute stem. I need more than 90 minutes. And I get that. But that's how you can look at your business a little bit different too. Scale needs to be looked at more than just stop for stop or package for package. It needs to be looked at based on size, based on number of trucks, and things like that. And you can ask your terminal for those numbers. Like what's the total mileage that we run? What's the total, geographic area as far as miles? And then kind of try to figure out what your piece of that is. Can definitely shed a different light on your scale.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I think that's good for kind of analyzing one side of the spectrum.
Mhm.
So the other end, when you're on the small side, either at the minimum, or I know there are contractors as the minimum shifted this year that are even finding themselves below the minimum. How do you think differently about how you're running your business, and what are your goals when you're that size?
So we do have some terminals at the minimum scale as well as the maximum scale. So our approach for that is to always be available, you never know when something's going to open up. And if it touches our area that we have already, we want to be able to step in and grab that up and get into that scale, the terminal scale. So that's just as important of a focus as our larger operations. We have to maintain the service and maintain, kind of everything that goes hand in hand with that. And also try to focus on the smaller things that aren't, just like I said before, with your code 85s and your safety and things like that. You have to stay on top of that. So when an opportunity does open up, you're the entity that gets asked to help out. And then once you help out, hopefully, you can get awarded that, or if they split it up or however that works, you might be able to take a little chunk of some more area or some more stops, and you kind of prove yourself. So once you prove yourself and show that you can do it, and you want to show you're that contractor, you're the contractor that can jump in, take over it, and run it just as smooth as there's no interruption in any type of service.
Yep. So again, staying top of mind, having the conversation with your terminal. If they say minimum is 10 and you're at 7.5, stay relevant and make sure you stay ahead of it and have the conversation and say, hey, if they're, we are interested in hitting that scale number or even growing, having the conversation with them. But if again, you're struggling in areas and you're not putting that effort into hitting your contractual obligations, then, come renegotiation, they're going to say, you're not putting the effort in versus you're too big to grow. So there's bite marks at both the top and the bottom end. But I think again, they'll, if it's rural and you just have less stops because you still run 10 trucks, I think that's an honest conversation to have and say, like, I don't necessarily need an exemption, but are me and the terminal manager on the same page when it comes to who I am in this terminal? Are my 10 trucks and maybe 400 stops as important as the guy that's doing 2,500 stops? And does he realize my contribution to the success of this terminal? And that's the key. But having those business conversations with your terminal manager sets you apart from, again, the guy that's just doing stops. And I think that's really key, to keep having those conversations, just like we want to have a seat at the table with FedEx so that they can continue to make change and look at us differently. That has to start at the terminal level.
Yeah, I think that's, everything you guys are saying is correct. It's when you're small, if you want to quickly find yourself in hot water, be somebody who's either having contractual issues or is showing no communication, no transparency, no conversations to set you apart as somebody who's interested in growing. I think it is very difficult for a terminal to see somebody who is doing well contractually and is coming to them saying, I'm ready for new opportunities. If you see or hear anything at this terminal, I want to grow with you, Mr. Terminal Manager. Like, that's a very different conversation and very different for them in terms of how they think about you and how scale might affect you.
Yeah. And again, when we talk about how we feel in that 10 contract or the 10 route contract that we have, we understand those pains that with a smaller contract, you can't afford a ton of management because the contract's not rich enough to afford those deep layers. And you have one accident, and because it's based on dispatches, you don't have the room. So you're quickly, in a lower safety tier. And when you miss one pickup or one stop, even on one route, it takes, you have a 40 or 60 route, rural route, you miss one and you're in the 80s, and then your service is potentially tanked. So on the smaller side of things, you kind of have to put the elbow grease in to manage that, to prove it's much easier for me to absorb one or two missed stops in a contract where I'm doing 3,000 stops a day versus the contract that I'm doing 780 or 900 stops a day. So, I think they each have their challenges as far as managing scale, but then managing performance and avoiding those failures that can come very quickly with a small contract. And again, having that conversation with the terminal to say, like, I want to get out of this. Like, I need an extra 100 stops. I need 2 more routes. I think that helps them see you differently. When you're like, hey, you had a 96%. Yes, but it was 2 stops. Like, I missed 2, out of the big picture, and I'm going to go work on that guy. But the 2 still does impact you quite, dramatically versus a large contract. So I think just keeping those things in perspective whatever, layer of the spectrum you're on. But I think if your eye is on growth, no matter if you have, 6 routes, 10 routes, 30 or 40 routes, I think at the end of the day, performance is key. If you want your customer to give you more work, you should probably be servicing them in the best way that you can.
Perfect. Yeah. Do you find it easier or harder to be at maximum or minimum? Where would you, what's the harder one to operate effectively? Or do you find that it's the same challenges in different ways?
Go ahead.
The large, we feel like the large is easier, I think, because there's a little bit more room for error. If you have a bad service day, it doesn't drag you down. In the smaller contracts, if you have, a couple service failures
Call off.
or a call off, it's really hard to recover from that on a day-to-day basis. So we found that our larger contracts actually run what we feel is maybe a little smoother than the smaller ones, but the smaller ones have the growth potential there to really grow and take on some more area. And
organic growth is just so present, that opportunity to grow organically when you get in and you're small, it's just the exponential growth. I mean, we've been in all kinds of different positions to grow. We've purchased routes, we've acquired routes, we've all the different possibilities of acquiring new area. I think we've jumped in it, but a lot of our growth has been organic. Starting with a small route, seeing something open or seeing somebody hand something down. They just, whether they want out of it for, retirement and they're not selling full price, or they just want out, or they're failing, or whatever those reasons are. We've always been then in a position where we can jump in and grow. So, we have 2 contracts that we're in that, and we've had those conversations with each of the terminal managers to say, we're interested in growth. So when that's open, we're going to do our best to manage to what we are now. But when it's open, we want a shot at it.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I think that's a lot of what we wanted to kind of cover around scale, and this is an ongoing conversation. So the conversation that we're having today around scale is very different than the conversation like we were talking about that we had around scale a few years ago. And so this could be a continuing shift, a thing where we and FedEx together are learning and shifting and making changes to figure out what the right happy medium will be. But for now, this is the environment we're operating in. And this is where, there are there's challenges on either end, but I think it's really important at the end of the day, one, to continue to focus on the things that FedEx cares about, to focus on the contractual standards that matter, and 2, be really transparent and focus on the communications and the conversations you need to have with the terminal wherever you are in scale, so that they understand who you are, where you're headed, what kind of things you're interested in as far as growth, to really make sure that you're successful in the future. So we're going to get to Q&A in just a second. I have a couple of things to read. So as I'm talking, if you have any questions that you want to type in, we'll get to those in just a second. So first off, we have 4 new listings this week on all P&D listings. So the first one's out of Northern Illinois, and it is 21 routes at 2.35 million. So if you are looking for some of those larger P&D contracts, we got a few of them here. This one has 26 employees, 2 managers, and it's a really dense operation. Again, 2 managers to assist in the transition, and some spare trucks as well. The next one is out of North Carolina. It is 12 P&D routes at $900,000. This one has 11 employees, a manager, and is again a really low mileage operation. Next one is out of Indiana. This is 15 P&D routes at $750,000. 16 employees, 3 managers, and a newer fleet. This one, like I said, has 3 full-time managers on staff to help with all kinds of things across the business. And then the last one we have is out of Kentucky. This is 13 P&D routes at $975,000. This is 11 employees, 3 managers, again, with new fleet. So again, a really full managerial staff to help in all of this. So again, Kentucky, Indiana, North Carolina, and Illinois. Illinois are the locations this week. So if you have questions on any of those, we can send you the full details on those. A couple of quick events to highlight. First is our next happy hour is in Denver on September 10th. So a couple of weeks away now. It is on our site. You can register for free. So if you're in that area, we'll be there soon as well. You can come meet our team, meet other contractors in your area, and really have a chance to network. Completely free to attend. We'll provide the food and the drinks and all the entertainment. Also, if you're still a new investor trying to find your way into the space, we host new investor workshops throughout the year to really help teach you everything we can about the space and help accelerate your first steps into the space and really help you figure out if this is the right one for you or not. And our next one is September 27th in our offices in Nashville, Tennessee. So if you have questions on that, we have all of that where you can go in and register online. If so, or you can just reach out to our team directly and we're happy to point you in the right direction. So a quick question here. I think it's a specific question, but I think we can talk about it generally. So Anne's asking, since she's just starting with P&D, how small should she start? What would you guys say is kind of an ideal starting size right now if you're getting into the industry? Oh, you guys are muted. Hold on.
Hang on.
All right, try again. Oh,
There we
All
go.
right. There you go. I think it just depends on your involvement or your staff that you have in place, your managers you have in place. If you have a good, if you're just getting started out and maybe getting routes, then if there's a good manager layer in there, then you could take on a larger operation. But if it needs a lot of involvement, then a smaller might be kind of the choice.
Mhm. For that point, the smaller it is, the more you're going to be able to get involved and learn, instead of kind of, drinking from the fire hose all at once. So it really does matter if you have a successful handoff. So if you're taking on a new contract from another contractor that has a 30 or 60-day handoff, that transition period, where they're going to really walk you through how to do DRO and how to set up and why things they've set up work this way and the processes and, know the people and ride-alongs and things like that at that level. Or if you're going to be completely hands-off, to be able to trust them, and that they have a conversation with you about long-term, their longevity and their involvement in the business. So I think Dave kind of hit the nail on the head. So depending on where you want to be, if you're coming in as an investor, you may want to start with a successful business that has existing management in place. If you're, looking to build a family business and, generational wealth and get your hands dirty and get in there, you might be able to start with something a little smaller. And then you can kind of, be that person that oversees the BC and the drivers.
Yeah. And I think in general, what we often are seeing these days as a starting size is like 10 to 12. You could be a little bit lower depending on what your goals are. What I would say in general, though, is that not all businesses are created equally, even at the same size.
Yeah.
So one of the things we do with buyers all the time, Ann, or anyone who's listening, is if you're still trying to figure out your right way into the space, we have consulting programs where we can walk you through evaluations and looking at specific businesses, because you'll find that there may be two businesses at the same price point that are in theory the same size, but have radically different requirements of you as an owner, and really understanding that things you might have to fix when you come in and what the management layer really looks like, what that manager is capable of, because again, managers are also not created equal. Just having a person who's labeled as a BC in the FedEx system does not mean that all of your operational tasks are handled.
Yes.
So really understanding the state of affairs of a business will help dictate what you can really handle as a new owner and where you might want to have to get more help if you want to grow. And so we can talk you through all of that, but it is not always as easy as just looking at the number of routes, is what I would say.
I liken it to flipping houses or looking at buying a house, a renovation, right? Depending on that house's old bones could have a rotten basement and you just don't even know about it.
That's
So,
exactly right.
so aligning yourselves with the right people to ask the right questions will definitely get you there to kind of uncover some of those things, which will align in the amount of work you want to put in, and whether it's a healthy business or just get your foot in the door and you're willing to do the hard work yourself. So I think Josh, I think you hit it right on the head.
Yeah, and one of the big considerations people don't always consider is there is a price to pay. There's also time to pay, and how much time you have is really going to dictate what you can really do with the business. And so that's another big consideration. And if you have questions, if anybody does on either a specific business or how we can help you, info@routeconsultant.com. It's the easiest email to reach out to and get a hold of us if you have those questions, and we can point you in the right direction.
Yes.
I'm not seeing any other questions that are here. So if I don't see any other Q&A come in as I'm talking and rambling for the next 10 seconds, I'm going to go ahead and call it. So it doesn't look like there's any frantic typers on my end. So Dave, Amy, thank you guys so much for being here.
Got it.
Like we always talk about, there's things that I can talk about. We have a lot of experience, but I love having your perspective, your decades of experience, and kind of seeing how this really looks like on the ground level. So again, thanks you guys for being here, and thanks everybody who was on the webinar today. We will see you all next week.
Sounds good.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Yeah, see ya.